I just promised myself I would not end this year without raising awareness for this. And I owe it to her, to this little girl, to my kids, to my girls. You know, I have daughters that I just want them to know that they always have a voice.
This episode is sponsored by Southern Utah Safe and Vault. It's one-stop shop, buy, education, delivery, everything you need with the safe or a vault door. Website is safesfirst.com. Their showroom is 1397 West, Sunset Boulevard, number 115 in St. George, Utah. Phone number is 435-767-7878. Hey guys, welcome back to the Derek Legg podcast. We're back in the vault today. We've got a return guest. I'm excited about our episode today. This is episode 116 with Aimee Stephens. First time we had Aimee on, we talked about her finishing the Ironman here in St. George, and it was kind of a thing that Mallory threw out, maybe have a contestant come in and talk. I didn't know you before. And so we met in studio, talked about the Ironman, and then there was a small section about short-term rentals.
Yep.
And that's kind of controlled my life for the last year. So thank you.
Sorry, not sorry.
So this is Aimee Stephens. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited for today. So back to the introduction that I kind of butchered right there. But so Ironman finisher ended up being the championships, right?
Yeah.
When
then I
moved
did
it
4
here.
more after that. So it's been a fun year.
That's awesome. I think when you were on, I asked if you were going to do more and you said no.
I said, I don't know. We'll see. And then like a year goes by and I do a total of 5. So, you know, you just never know.
Well, I've followed you on social media and I'm like, she's doing more of those.
Yeah, I definitely did more.
So since then we've become friends. We've been to a couple events together with the Vodacy guys and that group.
It's been awesome.
And so that's kind of catching us up of really our history. A couple weeks ago, Aimee had called me and asked if we could kind of sit down, have a conversation. And I said, yeah, why don't you feed me and we'll go. So we met at Cafe Rio for kind of a lunch dinner and sat and just kind of caught up and talked a little bit. And then she pitched the idea of coming on the podcast and talking about what we're going to talk about today. So I want everyone to kind of to pay attention. This is going to be an important topic. I'm grateful that you trust me with this. So I appreciate that. And this is going to be a great episode, guys, so stick with us. I'll kind of let you preference maybe the beginning of it, and then we'll kind of get in, if that works, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of going back to the intro, like what you said, like last year was just a big year for me in terms of, I had some things on my bucket list, right? Like doing that Ironman and then just sticking with that and getting my short-term rental. And that's just been such a fun journey to do that. And, but kind of rewind a little bit, a year before that, I had really started a very personal healing journey. And I'm just going to preface all of this by saying I will probably cry multiple times on this episode. So I'm just putting that out there. But during that healing journey, I wrote a book. And this is actually a book. It's so near and dear to my heart for so many reasons. But I actually started it back in 2018.
Okay.
And it's a book about healing. And for whatever reason, back in 2018, I just could not finish that book. And back in 2020, 2021, I went through something very difficult, very personal that kind of put me back on this healing journey. And that's when I knew it's time to finish this book. And so I picked that book back up, rewrote the whole thing, and finished it in 2021. And this book is about something that happened to me as a child. And I've never talked about it publicly before, so try and get through this episode. But when I was a child, when I was 12 years old, I was sexually abused by my older brother. And it took me a lot of years to heal from that, like 20 plus. And so when I did finally get help and I did heal from what happened to me as a child, it just became a passion of mine to one day be able to hopefully help other women. I'm sorry.
You're good.
Help other women that have suffered through that, that maybe haven't had an opportunity to heal completely or even know how or even know that they need to. That was me for probably 15 of those years. I didn't even know I needed to. I thought I had dealt with it by doing nothing. And so when I finally did heal from that 15 years ago, I knew one day I would be not here with you in this room, but I knew one day I would share it. And today's that day. And so that's why I'm here. That's why I called you that day, because I want to talk about something that's a very sensitive topic.
Again, I commend you for coming in, talking about it, and don't worry about tearing up. This isn't something that, you read or you watched. It's not a movie. This is your life. And so,
my life.
Yeah, feel all the emotions you need to feel. I think that's important. Maybe we talk a little, can we just start off with the abuse part of it and kind of go through that? And then I do want to talk about, because I think it's important, where you kind of touched on you didn't deal with it because you thought it was dealt with.
Yeah.
We can kind of transition into that if that's a good journey.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, what I'd like to start with is just a couple stats.
Perfect.
Because I really want people to know that this is not getting addressed for multiple reasons. And I went to the National Center for Victims of Crime to look at these stats, but just for girls, 1 in 5 girls are a victim of sexual abuse. And when I read that, I just, it's a very painful number to hear. There's a lot of girls that have gone through that. Children are most vulnerable between the ages of 7 and 13, which makes a lot of sense. I know we were talking a little bit about that earlier, why that is, but just that's an age where girls have not yet really found their voice for most girls, and they don't know how to stand up for themselves. And another stat on this website that I read is 3 out of 4 are sexually abused by someone that they know and trust. And that to me says so much about why it's not talked about why it's shoved under the carpet, so to speak. And so that's what I just wanted to share those stats, because I think that's why this topic needs to be talked about. It's not being talked about enough. And I can't tell you how many people I've heard just gradually or casually say, "Oh yeah, that happened to me when I was a kid too."
And you're like, "Wait, what?"
What?
Yeah.
This happened to you as a child? Did you deal with it? So that's why I really wanted to talk about it.
Okay. Yeah, those stats should open up some eyes. If you're, I don't know how to preference this other than just get into you kind of brought an outline because we want to stay on topic and move through this.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll just let you go. Sorry. Yeah. I'm like trying to fill gaps right here, but I got nothing else to say. I just think we dive.
Let's dive in. Dive in. So I want to show a picture. I brought this picture of me when I was 12 and a half years old. So I know the first thing you're going to notice are the bangs. So shout out to my bangs in the 80s. But I brought this picture because when I look at this picture, I see a very hurt little girl who didn't know what was going on. My life went from completely normal to completely abnormal in a matter of a night. And I didn't know what to do about it, so I did nothing. And just to kind of get into it, basically what happened, and I don't know what my older brother was going through, but something. And he would wait till everyone was asleep at night. And he would come into my room. And when he thought I was sleeping, when he thought everybody in the house was sleeping, he would sneak into my bedroom at night and he would touch me all over my body. And I just remember thinking, oh, it probably won't happen again. And then it happened again. And I remember thinking, okay, it probably won't happen again. And I pretended I was asleep because I didn't know what else to do. I mean, I can still remember being that child and just not knowing what to do. And it's so crazy now because now here I am as a woman and I have a voice, but I didn't when I was 12.
Yeah.
I didn't have a voice and I didn't know how to speak up. And so I didn't. And the more it happened, the more it kept happening until that was just my life. And I would go to bed at night and I would pray that he wouldn't come in. But I never knew when he was coming in. And that went on for a long time until one day he decided to tell my parents that he was doing it because he wanted to go on a mission. And here's what I want to say about my parents. They didn't know how to handle it. And back then it was not talked about. Like, I don't even think it's talked about enough now, but it wasn't talked about at all then. And my parents just didn't know how to handle it. And so the best way they knew how to do it, and I don't fault them for this. My parents have both actually passed away a long time ago. And I am so grateful that I was able to talk to them after I healed from all of this. And we had some beautiful conversations. And they were so sorry about how they handled it. They just didn't know any better. And so I love and honor my parents for not knowing. I don't even know if I could say I could have done it better back in the 80s, but they did the only thing they knew how to do, which was, we're going to forget this ever happened so we can move on with our lives. And so I remember by this point, I was about 13. They sat me down on the couch and they said, Aimee, your brother has repented and God's forgiven him. And so you need to forgive him. And we're going to pretend this never happened. And I said, okay.
And that was it.
And that was it.
I think that we talk about it on here a lot because I criticize my father a lot. But it's like you said, I think that they did the best thing that they knew how. And it's almost scary that maybe parents should be more versed in all of this stuff. You just hope it's something you never have to deal with.
They absolutely should now. And I can't even imagine as a parent what that would feel like to have one child coming to you and saying, I'm doing this to your other child, and know how to do the right thing for both of those children.
Right.
And so I know that they were doing the best that they could back then, but now is an opportunity. If any parents are listening to this that know that a child has gone through this or anything, I mean, you just they need help. They need help. They need to talk about it. And I do want to talk about kind of the ripple effect of what that did in my life for sure.
Anything else you want to touch on that?
Yeah.
Okay.
So kind of going back to that stat that I shared, that 3 out of 4 things with abuse happens with someone that they trust. What's so damaging about that is it creates so much confusion for a young child. In fact, I have a very interesting story. I remember being about 13 or 14, so maybe a year or two after this had happened, and I had a really good friend of mine who had a brother who I thought was cute. And I remember saying to her, your brother is so cute. And she's like, oh, that's so gross. It was confusing to me that she didn't think her brother was cute.
Yeah.
And that is so damaging because I had been so deeply affected by that abuse, and I had no idea. I had no idea that I was the child that something was wrong. And I thought it was weird that she didn't think her own sibling was attractive. And that is so painful to look back on because that abuse had such a ripple effect in my life in the sense that I had no boundaries. All my boundaries had been broken at the age of 12. And this is a bit of a sensitive topic, but I do want to talk about it because it's so important that anyone that has gone through sexual abuse, and it's so relative to the age that it happens. So I do want to talk about this, a bit sensitive, but For me, I was 12 years old. I was just starting puberty. My period was about to start. My body was starting to feel things. And so to have me feel sexual feelings with my brother was so incredibly damaging to me. And one of the most painful parts of this whole thing was I was so confused sexually. It's like my body had suddenly been aroused by my brother. No one talked to me about it. So no one talked to me about sex. No one talked to me about what all these things felt and meant. No one talked to me about how wrong it was that I felt that with my brother. And then I would go to church and I would hear things at church that made me feel like I was this horrible person.
Yeah, there's self-blame all over the place.
So much self-blame. I blamed myself for all of it. I blamed myself for like, why was he doing it? Did I do something? Did I cause this? Like what caused this? What did I do? And so there was so much blame. There was so much self-blame because when you're being sexually abused by someone, you protect them over yourself. And then what does that create? What pattern in your life does that create? It creates a pattern of always protecting someone else over yourself, which is exactly what I did for 20 years.
Yeah, an abuser or not.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I can't imagine. The confusion part, like there's no up or down. Like you don't know anything. The whole thing is just scrambled eggs.
Yeah.
And you're, like you were saying, you're already going through puberty and all the other changes. And then to stack that on top, I don't know how anybody deals with that. I mean, I really don't.
It was such a confusing time. I mean, I remember my friends at 13, 14 talking about, oh, I hope I get asked to the dance. And I was already feeling things sexually that I never should have felt at that age.
Right.
I wasn't thinking about the dance. In fact, I never went to one school dance. That matured me in a way that I was no longer interested in high school boys. I was no longer interested in younger boys. And so it matured me sexually, but emotionally, I was not mature.
Yeah.
And I had no help to navigate that.
So do you think as parents, the best way to navigate, like just, you got to ask the questions, you got to have the conversations? I mean, what would your advice be now? I mean, you have kids, you're a parent.
Absolutely. It would be, they need to talk to someone who, first of all, and I don't want to get into the church topic, but it's not a bishop. And that's what my parents did. They sent me to my bishop. My bishop is not a trained therapist, a trained psychologist that knows how to deal with sexual abuse or trauma, early maturity sexually. So kids that have gone through this, they need to talk to someone who knows how to talk to them, who knows how to allow them to express themselves, because I was feeling so many things and I didn't know how to navigate any of those things. And then it just led to one toxic relationship after another. The ripple effect of it, which I'll talk more about, but the ripple effect was so big and so wide because it just, like every year I got older, it just got bigger and bigger, that ripple effect. And I didn't know.
Right. I mean, you're just living life and doing the best you can.
Thinking I'm a normal kid.
Yeah.
Thinking the things that I'm feeling are normal things to feel, and they weren't.
So did that kind of hit you in high school that you weren't, like, you didn't have those normal thoughts like the other kids did? Like you're talking with dances, or when did that hit?
I didn't know it, but it just, like, it didn't make sense to me. I felt like I always stood out. You know, I was out of all my friends, I was the only one not going to school dances. And I got a job in high school at a movie theater. I had so many older men attracted to me because and you can talk to any therapist that deals with sexual abuse and they will say this, because my therapist talked to me extensively about this. When you are sexually abused and you mature sexually beyond your years, you will always attract toxic people into your space. You will always attract those men, and they can almost like sense it. They can sense it. And it was, I look back at those jobs and I had 20-year-olds. I dated a 21-year-old when I was in high school. Mind blowing.
So do you think that's like a red flag for any girl? Is that okay to say? I don't know. Maybe that's too broad.
I have 4 daughters, and I can tell you right now, if I had a daughter that age coming home with a 21-year-old, he would be walking right back out that door. Can I speak for other people? No,
right.
But I do think age gaps at that young of an age are incredibly damaging.
Yeah, I mean, especially in your situation, I mean, it makes sense when you kind of put that in order.
Yeah.
At the time, it's probably just like, oh, well, I guess she's hanging out with this 21-year-old.
Yeah.
Especially back then, there's just not as much, like you're saying, the conversations, the knowledge behind all of this, the patterns that people have put together, like those things just didn't exist.
Yeah.
Not that you're 100. I don't want to make it sound like that.
Well, and here's the thing too, like when you become a victim at such a young age, and this is something I talk a lot about in my book, you become a victim of everything. So becoming a victim of sexual abuse made me a victim in so many areas of my life. And I didn't know how to get out of that victim mentality. I didn't know how to stand up for myself. I didn't know how to fight for myself. I didn't have a voice. I got into one toxic relationship after another until I ended up in an incredibly toxic marriage. And I didn't know how to stand up for myself. I didn't even know how to get out of that marriage. It all was so toxic.
It just flips that switch and there's no going back.
And
well,
so
there is.
There is.
There is a good ending to this, but
Absolutely. Absolutely. And everything happens, for a reason and the way that it needs to happen. And I truly believe that I pray that my story will help other girls and other women who have suffered that just don't even know how to get help, because there is help. There are people out there that are trained to know how to talk about this and to know how to help you know these patterns in your life. And patterns are a big deal. And that's one thing I want to say. If someone's listening to this and they have these patterns in their life, and what's a pattern? Okay. A pattern is like maybe you're always complaining to someone like, why do I always attract these kind of men? Okay. That's called a pattern. And there's a reason you attract those kind of men. There was a reason I kept attracting these toxic men into my life. I had never dealt with this toxicity, this abuse as a child, and it just kept coming back into my world. And so raising awareness for women to understand what these patterns are, men and women, but anyone who's been abused, it will create patterns. And one thing I want to say too is everyone's scars look different. For some people, abuse makes it so they put up so many walls, right? It's just wall after wall. They shut everybody out. That can be a scar for some people. For other people, a scar might be they don't even know how to put up a wall if they tried. So everyone's scars are going to look different. Someone might be listening to this that was sexually abused and be like, well, I didn't go through that. Okay, well, they have different scars. And maybe it was the age that they were abused. I've talked to people before that were sexually abused at a much younger age. It did not have an impact on their sexual relationships at all. But they weren't going through puberty at the time. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of aspects to sexual abuse. Timing. Is it a family member? Is it someone you know, someone you don't know? How long did it last? What happened? How bad was it? There are so many things that can determine what those scars are and what the impact and that ripple effect is, but there's always something.
Yeah. So going through this, what do you think the most damaging part of it was?
The most damaging, here's the thing. I can sit here and say the abuse wasn't even the most damaging part. Right? It's like if you go run a race, let's say you go run a marathon. I'll use a race as an example. That's my favorite, right?
I'm not going to do that. You understand
Let's just pretend Derek goes and runs a marathon. Let's say you go run a marathon and you fall down. Is the most damaging part that you fell down or that you didn't get back up and finish the race? Because what if you fell down and you got back up and finished the race? Are you going to remember more that you fell down, or is it going to be more this incredible thing that you finished the race? Right?
Right.
And so I use that analogy to say, like, it's not even the abuse that I think was the most damaging part. Yeah, was that bad? Absolutely, sure. It was bad. But it was the fact that I was told to forget it ever happened. The fact that it was never dealt with, and I didn't know how it impacted me for years and years. And I made poor choices as an adult because of it. Some painful choices as an adult because I'd never dealt with it. And when I was finally sent to someone, and I went to therapy, and that's another thing I want to say is there might be people listening that are thinking, I've dealt with it. I went to therapy. I probably went to seven to 10 different therapists in that time, but they were recommended by church leaders. They were marriage and family therapists for my not healthy marriage. They were not trained in sexual abuse or trauma. So I never actually got help dealing with what happened. And here's the crazy part, it would come up. Like I remember going to some therapists and they're like, you know, like we would talk about, I was like, yeah, there was this thing years ago but I dealt with it. And then they'd be like, oh, it sounds like you dealt with that. Yeah, I dealt with that. The difference is when I went to someone who was trained in this and it came up, and I'll tell you that story because it's really interesting. She was like, no, you haven't dealt with it. Because if you had dealt with it, you would not have stayed in this marriage for 12 years.
Well, that's the way you said it to me. You were like, she says, well, did anything happen when you were a child? And you're like, well, I don't think so. Well, yeah, there was this one thing, and then she says, no, go back.
Yeah,
this is what we need to talk about.
Exactly. And it honestly took almost 20 minutes in that therapy session for me to even remember what it was. Because, and just to kind of share that story, like when I finally did get the right help and I went to this therapist who had been referred to me by a friend, and we talked about my marriage that I was exiting and just how bad it was and all of these things. And this was years ago. This was when I was like 31 years old. And she's like, okay, yes, this marriage has not been good. This needs to end. But I kind of want to understand some backstory here. So she said, maybe just start when you were 16. Like, tell me about every boyfriend you had from like 16 to marriage. Okay, well, I got married at 20, so that wasn't very long. But I kind of walked her through these relationships, and she just looks at me and she says, have you ever been in a healthy relationship with a man before? And I'm sitting there thinking, wow, no one has ever asked me that, ever. And the answer was no. I have never been in one healthy relationship with a man. And then she looks at me and says, okay. She says, what happened to you when you were a child? And the first thing out of my mouth was nothing. I said, I grew up in a great home, and I did. Great parents, siblings, like normal life.
Right. Quotations normal for people on
quote,
audio.
Yeah. Yeah. Quote normal. And she just kind of kept prying, kept asking questions. And about 20-ish minutes in, I was like, oh, wait, there was this one thing that happened when I was 12 with my older brother, but I dealt with it. It's like I dealt with that.
Forgave him, repentance.
Yeah, exactly. And she's like, can you just tell me about that real quick?
Yeah.
And I tell her about it, and she's like, okay, so that is the problem.
Yeah, let's start there. 16 was too far.
Yeah. She said that was never dealt with.
Yeah.
And not only was it never dealt with, it was like I was told to forget about it. So I forgot. I forgot. I just had no resources to get help. And that's probably the number one thing I want to say is going back to your question. This is a very long answer to your question, but it's being told to forget and never dealing with something that impacted my life for 20 years. That's the most damaging part.
Yeah. Well, and I'm kind of just glancing over your stuff because I want to make sure we cover everything that you have. For people that are on audio, I've got a kind of a page in front of me with some bullet points. So, and I'm fine with that because I love that it even opens it up to me on what we need to explore, right? Because I wasn't there. And so it kind of helps me out. I'll just read it right off of here because I think you worded it perfect. It says, becoming a victim at a young age and not dealing with the abuse creates a victim mentality that can last for years. I mean, when you said that, I think like, and other things can create a victim mentality, not just that, right? And I think that counselor that was so in tune to it, and it's interesting that she was like 16 on, and then you're like, yeah, no normal relationships. And then she's like, so what happened as a child? And I guess that goes back to where you're saying she specialized in that, right? And so she knew.
She was a psychotherapist. She specialized in like early childhood trauma. So And one thing I want to say about my therapist, and I should have actually said this at the beginning, I was very close to her. She changed my life in every way I can even describe. So she was there for me going through that. And she was there for me about 3 years ago when I was going through something very painful as well. And she died this year. She's the only person I've ever given my book to. And when I wrote it in 2021, I gave it to her for Christmas. And she read it and she said, Aimee, you have to get this published. And about a month before she died in February this year, we were texting about something and I said something about my book. And she said, Aimee, please get that published. She's like, it's going to change a lot of lives. And a month later, she died. So I just promised myself I would not end this year without raising awareness for this. And I owe it to her, to this little girl, to my kids, to my girls. You know, I have daughters that I just want them to know that they always have a voice, that they should always stand up for themselves. And I wish I would have known how at 12, but I didn't. And I just want people to know that are listening to this that if you feel like you don't have a voice, if you feel like something has happened in your life, and maybe it's not even sexual abuse, maybe it's something else that just made you feel powerless.
Something traumatic
That made you feel powerless and made you feel like you can't stand up for yourself. Get help. There's people that are trained to help you figure that out.
Yeah, I'll reiterate again, like if you're that parent, have those conversations. I mean, I think that, because again, any 12-year-old's not going to know how to deal with any of that. And so that's, in I think you covered it well, where there's no blame on your parents. I think they did the best that they could, right?
Yeah.
But so that's me telling parents now, if you're listening to this, do the best that you can and have those conversations.
Yeah.
Like there's no excuse now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's dive into the ripple effects, if you're okay, moving on to, okay. Sorry, I'm not trying to push you through this. If you got something to say.
No, I love it. I love it. That's why I made this.
Yeah. Well, I can get in the weeds too. Yeah. So I can get down rabbit holes. So it's good for me as well. Like that's why I have my book here. Now, most people probably don't know I even have a book, but I have to write things down to keep me in line.
Yeah, I'm the same.
So this actually helps. I've only written one thing so far, so we're doing pretty good. So we've kind of touched on a couple of these already, like you had mentioned. We're gonna jump back into it, but I'll just let you take. What's the first ripple effect that you saw? I mean, we talked patterns. I mean, what are some things you want to touch on?
So I want to talk about the boundaries, because I think that's one of the biggest things with sexual abuse that happens is it makes it so you don't know what boundaries are. And one thing I've learned over the years with boundaries, if you do not have boundaries, it is impossible to respect other people's boundaries.
Because they're not even a thing to you.
You don't even know what they are. So for me to be touched at the age of 12 by my older brother, it like completely I don't know how else to say it other than it fucked up my boundaries. Yeah. Sorry to say that word.
They're just non-existent.
They're non-existent. I remember in college having a conversation with a man who was married. And my roommate's like, why are you talking to him? He's married. I was like, gosh, I didn't even think about that. Like I shouldn't have been talking to him, this 18-year-old girl. But it just everything got messed up. Everything got messed up. And it's like that story I shared about thinking like wondering why my friend didn't think her own brother was cute. Like everything was just weird and off. And I didn't know what was normal and what wasn't normal. And you would think like, okay, you're going to grow up and you're going to learn that.
It just distanced more, put more distance between you and maybe so-called normal. I don't know if that's the right way to say it.
Well, and going back to my first marriage, it was like, that's one of the reasons that marriage was so toxic, is because I had no understanding of what a good marriage was. No understanding. like when things were so bad, I was like, yeah, I heard marriage was hard. I guess this is what they mean. This is the hard. Holy crap, it's hard. So hard, I hate it.
Yeah.
And I stayed for 12 and a half years because I didn't know how to get out. I didn't even know I could. And making poor choices and just, so kind of going back to that topic of boundaries, people that are sexually abused, and no matter what age, but anyone who goes through sexual abuse has to learn how to create boundaries. And like I said earlier too, like everyone's scars look differently. So some people that have been sexually abused, boundaries may not be as big of an issue. Actually, I'm going to change my mind on that because I know people that have been sexually abused that have not gotten help. And they may have boundaries with like men, but they don't have the right boundaries with other people in their life. They tolerate too much. They say yes when they should say no. Boundaries should be everywhere in your life. I have people blocked that I have a boundary with because I no longer want them in my life. And guess what? I get to choose that.
Right. Your life.
It's my life. It's my happiness. So I've learned to create boundaries everywhere in my career, with my family, my siblings, who I want in my life, with men, with friends. When someone asks me something and I don't want to do it, I say no. I'm going to an event this weekend. Someone reached out to me and said, hey, do you want to share a room? Okay, I'm way past the point of sharing rooms in my life. And I was thinking to myself, 15 years ago, I would have said yes, and then I would have hated the whole thing. Right. Because I would have shared a room, and I hate sharing rooms. And I just said, you know what? I'm so sorry, but that's just not going to work for me. I hope you find something. Can't wait to see you at the event. Great. No. I don't want to share a room.
So when I asked to ride with you up to Salt Lake for a Vodacy thing, that's because you didn't want to ride with me. It's all making sense now.
Actually, that was not it.
I'm just kidding.
I love that, though, that you remember that. I think I had something going on that day.
I think you were going a different time than I could, too,
that's
I
what
think
it
is
was.
what it was. I'm just trying to add some light.
That's really funny. But yes, if I didn't want to, I would have said no.
Yeah.
just for the no.
It wouldn't have been, it's a different time schedule for me.
Exactly. But the boundaries thing is so important. And you talk to any therapist, and they're going to teach their clients how to create boundaries in their life.
Yeah, I think just society in general would be better if everyone learned how to say no.
Right.
Like, just tell me no.
Yeah.
I don't need a story. Just tell me no.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think almost traumatic abuse or not, like people need to learn how to do that.
Well, and I think in general, again, like abuse or not, like I think a lot of kids grow up in homes and situations where they don't feel like they have a voice. Mm-hmm. And then that leads to becoming an adult without a voice. And an adult without a voice is way worse.
Yeah. 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 So learn to build those boundaries and say no early.
Yeah.
I like that.
So I know we've been talking about the whole boundary thing, and there's one other thing with sexual abuse that I think is really important to talk on, is that when you become a victim of sexual abuse, and this is exactly what happened with me, was I was looking out for my brother over myself. That's why I pretended I was asleep. And every time I look back and I think back on this little girl laying in her bed, pretending that she was asleep, it makes me angry, to be honest. Not at my brother. It makes me angry at me because I'm like, geez, Aimee, like you could have just said something or moved or made a noise or something. And it probably never would have happened again. But I didn't want him to know that I knew. So I kept quiet, not for me. I kept quiet for him. And this is part of one of those patterns that really happens when kids go through sexual abuse, is because almost every child that deals with sexual abuse, at some point during that abuse time, they are choosing to protect the abuser over themselves. And what does that lead to? A life of choosing other people, protecting other people over yourself, over your needs. That's why I stayed in a toxic marriage for 12 and a half years. I was protecting what I thought I had to do. I was protecting my religious beliefs at the time, meaning I felt like I had to stay in this sacred marriage that was not sacred at all.
Right.
And I never had the ability to choose me over any toxic relationship I was ever in. And that started at the age of 12 in that bed.
Well, it's like circling back to having a kid being able to say no.
Yeah.
Right? And who knows? I mean, who knows if it would have changed it or not? I mean, you would know more than me if it would have changed that. And, but being able to have that voice, I mean, I think that's strong. When you said that, I thought, heck, that's anybody, but definitely someone in this situation.
Yeah.
I mean, do you think that if you'd have said stop, that he would have just ran out of the room and never done it again?
Yeah.
You think so?
I actually do. I do, because he was a lot older than me. He's about 4 years older than me, but he was still young enough where I think that really would have scared him. I mean, he wasn't like he was an adult.
Yeah.
So, and this story isn't even about him. Who knows what he was going through at the time.
Sure.
But I didn't have a voice. And so it just led to it happening over and over and over again. And every time it happened, it's like I just became a shell of a kid. And like, this is something I talk about in my book, where it's like who I was before that abuse started, that little curious ball of energy. I had so much energy as a child, to who I was after that, where I was always trying to like hide myself. And I still had a lot of energy, but not knowing how to channel it, and always so self-conscious, and having all these sexual feelings, but not understanding any of them. And my parents never talked about sex, which I have, that's like a whole other podcast about why you should talk about sex with your children, abuse or not.
Yeah.
Because let's even talk about that, because.
Well, let me get one question in, since we're kind of there. Are you still mad at your brother?
Not at all. And I'm so glad that you asked that, because I think for so long I carried a lot of resentment towards him, not even really knowing it, because I didn't know how it impacted me, right? But when I finally was able to deal with it, and I finally was able to heal, and when I say the word heal, there was so much work that went into that healing. I mean, after that first session and this all came out, we went from maybe me seeing her once or twice to, she said to me, "You're going to be in here twice a week. We have a lot of work to do." And there was a lot going on in my world at the time that I had to work through and deal with and move through. And I really was able to let that go. And so my feelings for my brother, like, no hard feelings. I get it. You know what I mean? Like, these things happen, but, and that's why, like I said earlier, like, I'm so grateful that I was able to heal from this when I did, because I was able to have those conversations with my parents.
Yeah.
Honestly, I probably had more to let go of with my parents than I did with my older brother, because I felt like they had more to do with the outcome of that abuse than even the perpetrator.
Well, I think there was a difference between forgiveness and working through it.
Yeah.
And so, well, not even forgiveness, but forgetting about it. Maybe that's a better way to say it.
Exactly.
Versus, hey, let's move past it, forget about it. Everyone's good. Okay, break. Let's move forward, right?
Right. Because when you heal from something like that, to be honest, you have to relive it. And I remember having sessions with her, and I was completely sobbing, because I had to go back and talk about it and relive it and talk about how I felt. And it was so painful. The blame that I felt and the feelings that I felt about myself, and thinking about like all the times I would sit in church as a little kid and listen to them talk about like, hey, if you law of chastity, I thought I had broken the law of chastity at 12.
Before you even knew what it was.
I didn't even know what it was. And then as I got older, I remember going into Young Women's and getting older, and then they really talked about it in high school. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm already going to hell. I literally thought I was going to hell my entire childhood because of what happened with my brother. And I didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah, out of your control. So let me ask you this. Do you think that it would have been better to deal with like recently, like you kind of have the last few years, or closer to when the abuse happened? Does that make sense?
Yes. Okay. So here's the thing about healing from something like that. It doesn't just happen once. There's different layers of healing as you age. Absolutely. I wish,
because there would have been things that you wouldn't have known you had to have healed for.
Exactly.
Things would have happened in your life that you would have had to go back and redo that anyway.
Yeah. But being able to heal at 13 and being able to talk about the sexual feelings and what I was feeling, and because one of the things that was so damaging was when he touched me, it felt good.
Right.
And I was so confused by that because I felt so guilty about it, but it felt good. And so I didn't know how to process those two completely opposite extremes. And I've talked to other people before that have gone through this, that have gone through sexual abuse, and it's very similar. There's a lot of guilt, but then your body is going to feel what it's going to feel.
Right.
If you're being touched, whether it's you're being touched by your brother at 12 or a guy that you're attracted to, if you don't understand that, you're not going to know the difference. That's the thing, right? Like I didn't know the difference. And because it was never talked about, sex was never talked about. And then I never got help dealing with it. So going back to your question, absolutely, I wish so much, and whoever's listening to this, if you know anyone that's gone through this or you have a child or you've been through it, like deal with it as soon as possible, because you're going to have to deal with like that effect then. But then as you age, like let's say I had dealt with it at 13. Honestly, I probably would have had to deal with it again at 18 as I was starting to get into like adult relationships. And then probably when I was in a good relationship, I probably would have wanted to get therapy with my person to deal with it with him. You know what I'm saying? So there would have been like layers to healing for sure.
I'm with you.
Yeah.
That'd be a great podcast name, by the way. Layers to Healing.
Ooh, that would
Yeah,
be.
there you go.
I like
That is a good one.
It's my contribution for the day.
I know we brought this up earlier, but I think one thing that would have made a big difference in terms of me being able to speak up is if my parents had talked to me about sex, because it was such a taboo topic.
Sure.
That when this started happening with my brother, I was so scared. I mean, that's why I didn't ever tell my parents. I was too scared.
Yeah.
We never talked about sex. All I knew was sex was bad. I heard sex was bad at church, and that's it. Sex was bad. So when this sexual thing was happening to me at 12, there was no way I was bringing that up ever. So let's play that out differently. Let's say my parents had openly been able to talk to me about sex, and then this thing started happening with my brother. I would have felt so much better going to them and saying, hey, this thing happened to me.
Yeah, they break that awkward tension instead of you having to do it.
And that's something I will say as a parent, and my girls are exhausted when they were younger with me talking about sex because
in a healthy way.
In a healthy way. Like I talked to them about it. In fact, I remember this one. I have a very vivid memory when my oldest daughter was, I can't remember what, anyway, like young, like 14, 15, 16. I took her and her friends to a movie, and they were watching this movie. I can't remember the movie, but there was a scene where the girl and the guy, they're by the fireplace and they're making love, and then they wake up the next morning and he cooks her breakfast, and I look over and I see like these 5 girls just like dreamy. And I'm like, oh geez. And so we're driving home and I'm like, guys, okay, we're going to you're going to hate this conversation, but we're having it. I'm like, first of all, he's never cooking you breakfast. I said, that's never going to happen. The chance of it happening by your fireplace, real slim as well.
Yeah.
So it was just like this conversation that my girls just knew it was an open conversation. We talked about it, when it's appropriate, when it's not. What's wrong? What's good? Like it was just, it was an open dialogue. It's not like we talked about it all the time,
Sure.
but the dialogue was open. And did I do it right all the time? No. I have very specific times that my girls make fun of me about things that I said, and like times that I talked about things I was like, yeah, that was stupid. But the point is that I tried, right? Like I just, my goal as a parent was to just have open dialogue about sex so that they wouldn't ever be in a situation where they didn't feel like they could come and talk to me about it.
Right. And I think that's the important part.
Yeah, that's the important part.
Yeah, I think like you're saying, you're being embarrassing mom or not, right?
Right.
Like I think that them having that open dialogue is huge. I mean, I kind of had that when I was younger. Like nothing was ever talked about. I had 3 older brothers.
Yeah.
And so like, I mean, they taught me more than my parents ever did.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Well, and you think about it now. Okay, we didn't have phones back then.
Yeah.
We didn't have the internet.
Yeah, we were barely getting into the internet when I was in middle school.
Exactly. And when I was there, I didn't have any of that stuff. I mean, my goodness, I think it's more important today than it ever has been because kids have access to everything.
Right.
If they want to find it out, they're going to find out. So you, as a parent, I just believe you should so be part of that conversation because those conversations are happening, whether they're with you or whether they're with kids at school.
Right.
So.
Yeah, you can put as many blockers as you want, but they're going to find ways to get around. I was a kid once.
Right? It's just funny stuff. But yeah, I mean, obviously when I was a kid, just the conversations back then weren't happening. And I think there's a lot more people my age, right? I'm in my late 40s, and I think there's a lot more women my age that could probably have this similar conversation, that they dealt with something that was brushed under the carpet, never talked about. And
Well, it was what, 1 in 5?
yeah, 1 in 5.
Like if you know 10 people, that's 2 of them.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's 2 of them.
You have to double check the math. So that's just my goal here, right? Like I want to be part of this conversation. I want to start the conversation. I think it's an important conversation to have. I want to raise awareness for this topic. And I want to raise awareness for the fact that abuse leaves scars. And if those scars are not dealt with, they will turn into lifelong patterns. They will turn into toxic relationships. And that was painful. That was a painful 20 years that I would have loved those 20 years to not be in toxic relationships.
You know, it's weird to think though, because it's like like you were saying, all that brought you here though.
I am who I am today because of it.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't change anything, right? Like
right.
I wouldn't. Like I love who I am today. I love the journey I've been on. I love my life experiences and what it's taught me. And I'm so grateful for all of it. One thing I want to touch on too is something I'm so grateful for is going through this healing process 15 years ago and my therapist being so smart and saying to me, Aimee, you need to talk to your parents. You have things that you need to tell them and they need to know how this impacted your life. And it took me a long time to actually do that. Like I was like, no.
So even as an adult,
even as a 32-year-old adult, I was so scared to sit down with my mom and dad, and I didn't want to hurt them.
Yeah.
Like my parents were such amazing people, and I didn't want to hurt them. But they needed to know that they made a choice that really impacted my entire life. And I am grateful every single day that I listened to her and I talked to them, because a year and a half after we had those clearing conversations, both of my parents passed away.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine the weight that would be on you if that didn't happen and then they passed away.
No. So have the conversations,
Yep.
right? You never know when those people are going to be out of your life and you're not going to have an opportunity to talk to them. And we had many beautiful conversations about it. And I can still remember sitting in the living room with my dad and just, he was so sorry. He was so sorry. And I just remember him holding me and just saying, Aimee, I'm so sorry. And that's why I just have so much love and compassion for them, because they did what they thought was best. They sent him to the bishop. They sent me to the bishop, and they told us, okay, let's forget.
Yeah.
And let's go back to being a happy family. And so healing is so important. Talking about it so important. Acknowledging it, right? Step one is always, in anything in life, step one is always acknowledgement. You can't deal with anything until you acknowledge it. So you have to acknowledge it, be willing to talk about it, heal from it, have those clearing conversations. It's so important. And I look at my life now, now my parents have been gone for 11 years, and I'm so glad I was able to deal with that with my brother. I don't, we don't ever have to talk about that ever again. It was dealt with. But I'm talking about it now because now I want to help other people heal. That's my passion. My goal is I want to help other people heal. And I brought my book. This is my manuscript. It has not yet been published, but I'm so passionate about this book because it is my story. It is my healing journey. And there's a lot more details, obviously, in this book than what we got through today. But
yeah, for people on audio, this is an inch thick? How many pages is that? Do you know?
I don't know. It's a
it's more than I've read in my life.
It's a good solid book that I've got to get published. Yeah.
So that's the next goal, right?
This is the next goal. Yeah.
I think that I want to bring it back to this is like everything that happened led you to here, right? But I think the next step above that is this.
Yeah.
It's talking about it. It's this book. It's whatever way you end up taking this in the future. And I know it's kind of it's like a mission that you're taking on yourself to get people talking about it and try and get people some help.
Yeah, this is what I refer to as my passion project. Is I want to talk about this, raise awareness, help people that need help people know that they even need help. There might be someone listening to this that is maybe thinking, I didn't even know I needed help, or I didn't know what this pattern meant. What is a pattern? Do I have a pattern? Like, that was me. Like, I remember going to that therapist, and when she started identifying these patterns, I was like, oh my goodness. It was like my whole life flashed in front of my eyes. And I could see my whole life as this whole series of patterns that controlled everything I did and every relationship I had been in. And it was painful, to say the least.
Yeah, I think that's the scariest part, is being that old and not knowing what to do or what to say, or not being able to say anything, and then not even knowing something's wrong with you.
Yeah.
I mean, I can imagine. I think you're like the bravest person I know, even coming to talk. So when we went to lunch and you talked about this, I thought, okay, if you're ready, let's do it. Let's knock it out. Anything I can do to help, I'm here. I think as far as podcasts, you tell me which ones you want to get on and we'll get you on them. I think that anybody that wants to help people progress or heal or move forward or anything. If this isn't a story to talk about, then I don't know what you're talking about on a podcast. To be honest.
Yeah.
And let's set a date on your book. Can we set a date publicly right here of when we're going to?
Yes.
How does that even work? Do you know?
I've looked into it. I've had conversations with people that have published. I know the actual publishing process is long.
Sure.
So it's hard to put a date on, like, okay, when would this be the written
when can
word?
I read it?
Yeah, when can it be read? I think that's probably months, but
so when are you going to get on the phone with a publisher? Publisher.
Yes, my goal is by the end of the year to have a publisher, and I will say this: I do not want to self-publish this book. I'm not interested in self-publishing. I want a publisher that can market this book. I know there are good reasons to self-publish, and I do not think this is the book for that. So my goal, and I've looked into all the different options.
So everyone that's like, just self-publish, we're not interested.
No, I'm not interested. I've already looked into it. I've definitely done my research on self-publishing. So not the route I feel like for this book is the proper route. So my goal is by the end of the year, and this is such a bold goal because we are less than 3 months out. But my goal is to have a publisher who is willing to publish this book.
Have a commitment from a publisher.
Yeah, that's the commitment to myself,
to
her,
12-year-old girl,
and to my therapist that changed my life. And I promised her I would get this published.
Well, I'm gonna hold you to it. Okay. I'm gonna keep tabs on you.
Please do.
Well, we got resources. As far as podcasts, obviously we have that with Blue Forum with Blake and Mallory. They're at 7, pretty close to 10, I think, if we can say that publicly, Blake.
Oh yeah.
Okay. And then and even like Cody Adent has published a book, so he might be a good resource. But Blake, even with you guys, there's got to be resources out there that we have a connection with.
Yeah, we're getting into this space. Actually, we've done 2 audio books in this very studio that you're sitting in, because we do have some audio treatments in there, and they sound amazing. And there's a whole world to navigate. We would love to help you out any way we can. So
love that.
Just let us
There
know.
you go. You already got a team.
Right.
I'm not very good at reading, but I can keep you accountable.
That's right.
You've been in that chair twice, so you got a team.
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think that's enough emotion for today.
I think I've cried enough for the night.
No, you're extremely brave. I'm proud of you. I'm proud of you for coming on and talking about it. It's a like touchy subject, maybe not the right word. One that's not talked about enough, but it's so close to you that
it's a sensitive subject.
Sensitive. That's a better word.
Especially when you think about the fact that it was my older brother.
Yeah.
And there's probably a lot of people that have people in their life that they don't want to talk about it because of that reason. And
your number of people that they trusted, right, was what, 4 out of 5?
3 out of 4 adolescents who have been sexually assaulted were victimized by someone that they knew well.
Yeah, that's disturbing.
It's incredibly disturbing. And I think that's why it's just not talked about.
Yeah. And so the goal behind this really is spread awareness, help people heal, let people know that, And if you're religious type, to start at the bishop, knock yourself out, but end with someone that's trained to help people heal with these things.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
I think it's fair because obviously bishops have their role, right?
Sure.
But they're not trained therapists. They're
agree.
not trained in trauma. And so go to them for comfort or whatever you need to kind of work through whatever religious stuff is important to you. But they don't know what to do to help you deal with the trauma itself.
Right.
And that's where you need someone who's trained to do that.
Right. And I'm glad you did. I'm glad you found her. And I'm glad she helped you.
Life-changing.
Yeah.
Life-changing.
Okay. Anything else? Anything else you want to put out? How can people, are you okay with people reaching out to you?
Yes, I would love
How do they
that.
keep tabs on the book? How do they do that?
I've got to start something with the book. So the book's here. I've edited it. I'm still kind of working on like a final revision, but it's ready to get to a publisher. So, but I haven't talked about it This is the first time I've publicly talked about the fact.
I love that you brought it.
This is my baby.
This is real, Derek.
This is real. This is my book, and I think there's like 5 people in my life that even know I wrote a book.
There's more now.
There's more now. So this is the goal for sure, because there's so much in here. I'll call it gold, but it's my life, and it's my heart, and my soul is in this book, and the entire goal of this book is to teach people how to heal. And even like underneath the title, it says it's my personal journey of going from being a victim to a victor.
Exactly.
And that's how I look at my life now. I adore my life.
You're extremely strong.
I'm strong. I do things that I love. I love my career. I love every aspect of my life. But it all started with that healing journey 15 years ago.
Right. So how can people get a hold of you? Social media, email, what's the best?
Social media is the best for sure.
And
so
what's your handle?
So on Instagram, I'm Healthy Aimee, AIMEE.
Yeah, it's like aim, like you take aim.
Take aim. Amy. I love it. Yeah. So that's probably the best way. Instagram or Facebook. Yeah.
And it's all Healthy Aimee.
No, on Facebook, it's just Aimee Stephens.
Okay, that's what I thought. I was like, wait. And then she's getting a TikTok.
Yes, my daughter's like, Mom, you've got to put this on TikTok. So that shall happen at some point, yeah.
Well, then in my opinion, I could be wrong. Blake's more versed in this than I am, but I think TikTok is going to be more of your target market. I think that there's going to be a lot of younger generation on there, but I guess anybody's your target market. Maybe it's shallow to say that it's just younger generations, but I guess that would be your story, but there's people in their 30s and 40s that need to heal from it as well. And there's your Facebook audience.
Right. And then there's people that might be listening to this that maybe they've had a child that have gone through this and they didn't quite know what to do to help them. And I would love anybody that has had a child that has dealt with this, please reach out to me. I would love to talk you through how to help them get through that and what maybe those next steps are. Yeah,
and we'll tag you on everything too. So if you're hearing this, it should be pretty easy to navigate to Aimee. So, All right, guys, thanks for being with us. This is episode 116. If you're still with us, please like, share, comment, go follow Aimee. We're going to follow the progress on the book. And I'm going to try my best to keep her accountable to get this ball rolling.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Thanks for taking the time and coming on. I know how close this was with you, and I love that we were able to take the time and do it.
Me too. It means a lot.
Okay, guys, we'll see you next week.